Right, let's get into some news. I've cut it down this week because I have a lot more to cover. And one of the first things is the world's total fertility rate. There was a survey done this week, and it has been cut in half since 1950, the fertility rate. And yet the population is still rising. And this is according to a study in the Lancet this week. And the total fertility rate, or the average number of children a woman would have if she lived through all her reproductive years, declined from 4.7 live births in 1950 down to 2.4 in 2017. Meanwhile, the global population has nearly tripled since 1950, from 2.6 billion to 7.6 billion, according to the report, which doesn't make much sense, but there you go. And an average of nearly 84 million people have been added to the Earth's population every year since 1985. I'm ignoring that, whoever is ringing that bell. Could be clowns, but I'm ignoring it anyway. While total fertility rates fell across all 195 countries and territories in the data, they were split roughly down the middle between those below replacement level and those above. And the person who did the survey said replacement describes the total fertility rate at which a population replaces itself from generation to generation, assuming no migration, which comes out to about 2.05 live births, the authors say. For example, a woman in Cyprus had one child on average in 2017, while a woman in Niger had 7.1. And this range is lower than the 1950s, in which the total fertility rates ranged from 1.7 live births in Andorra and 8.9 children in Jordan. And the world is really divided into two groups, they said. In a generation, the issue is not going to be about population growth, it's going to be about population decline or relaxing immigration policies. In countries that want to boost fertility rates, the creation of financial incentives for families, including parental leave, have been shown to have a small effect. Only 33 countries, largely in Europe, were falling in population between 2010 and 2017. This is why Britain, Germany, and the other leading countries in Europe, and also America, is flooding the country with migrants, because those countries of where they're coming from have a higher birth rate. This is to keep their Ponzi schemes going. That's the top and bottom line. Whether it's the pension fund, which they've spent, or various other slush funds to keep money in their coffers. That's the whole top and bottom of it. And it's been going on for the last 30 years. Because Western world is declining. They need 2.3 children, or they used to need 2.3 children per family to keep the system, the money system, going. And the average went down to 1.1 children. That's the difference. And so that's why their financial system is now collapsing. Another reason why their financial system is now collapsing. Good news in Montana. A US judge on last Thursday halted construction of the Keystone XL pipeline, which would carry heavy crude from Canada to America, throwing another obstacle in the path of the project that has been in development for the past decade. And the ruling dealt a major shock and setback to the Trans-Canada Corporation and could delay the construction of the $8 billion 1,180-mile pipeline. Well, $8 billion to spend on oil pipelines, and yet they can't spend $8 billion for water pipelines to all the areas that are struggling without water in the southwest. It's all about priorities. It was said to be a blow to the President Donald Trump, who approved the line shortly after taking office in 2017 as part of his plan to boost US energy infrastructure. We have other ways. A TransCanada spokesman could not be immediately reached for comment and refused to comment furthermore after that. And the ruling is seen as a major victory for environmentalists, tribalist groups and ranchers who spent more than a decade fighting against construction of the pipeline that will carry heavy crude from Alberta to Steel City, Nebraska. From there it will connect to key refining points in the US Midwest and also the US Gulf Coast, as well as export terminals in the Gulf. Good news on that. China is the next piece we're going to, and it's to do with housing, and not a shortage of it, because China's been in a massive building program. But the Chinese President Xi Jinping mantra as that homes should be for living in is kind of fallen on deaf ears in China, with tens of millions of apartments and houses standing empty across the country. Now, the soon-to-be-published research documents will show roughly 22% of China's urban housing stock is currently unoccupied. And that adds up to more than 50 million empty homes, he said. And this is Professor Gan Li, who ran the nationwide study. Now, the nightmare scenario for policymakers is that owners of unoccupied dwellings rush to sell if cracks started appearing in the property market, which then causes prices to spiral and obviously more empty homes. And the latest data from last year also suggests Beijing's efforts to curb property speculation, considered by leaders a key threat to national and social stability, are coming up short. There is no single country with such a high vacancy rate as China. This is according to Chengdu's Southwestern University of Finance and Economics. And should any crack emerge in the property market, and it already has, the homes to be offloaded will hit China like a flood. Now, a study back in 2013 showed 49 million vacant homes, so it's now increased by another million and or more. And housing speculation has bedeviled China's leaders for years, as some cities and provinces tightened buying restrictions, only to see money flooding into other areas. Rampant price gains also means millions of people are shut out from the market, which is replicated right throughout the Western world, as you know, which exacerbates inequality. And Xi famously said in October last year, the houses are built to be inhabited, not for speculation. I'm glad he's recognised part of the problem. Holiday homes and the empty dwellings of migrants seeking work elsewhere account for some of the deserted properties, but purchases for investment are the key factor in keeping the vacancy rate high, according to the survey. And this is despite curbs across the country meant to discourage the buying of multiple dwellings. Ford, the motor company this time, Foundation has played a massive role in crushing America and its people, but the motor company is now getting close to being labelled junk again. According to the bond market this week, the company's debt is trading like it's speculative grade, as investors worry about higher steel tariffs and slowing sales will weigh on its profits. Now, Ford is currently rated one step above junk by Moody's Investors Services and 2 steps by S&P Global Ratings. Any further downgrading would be painful for bond investors and also for the company. Now, the automaker has more than 150 billion, not million, of short and long-term debt globally. 150 billion. And is one of the 15 biggest corporate bond issuers in the US outside of the financial sector. Hedge funds turned in their worst monthly performance in nearly 3 years in the first part of this year when Ford was, in 2005 when Ford was last cut down to junk along with General Motors, who have never really recovered. Perhaps not. I'll have more on the fires in 2 pieces later, but this is kind of what's been ongoing. Communities across Ventura and Los Angeles counties, including Malibu, Calabasas and the Topanga Canyon area, were placed under mandatory evacuation orders last Friday as the Woolsey and Hill fires approached. Now, the fires have torched, when I inserted this piece of the show, 75,000 acres in Southern California. It's gone up since. And in Northern California, the Camp Fire has burned 100,000 acres in Butte County. I think I've said that correct. On its way towards Sacramento. 9 have been killed, which is now raised to over 50, and 35 are missing, which is now raised over well over the 100, after the Camp Fire raids through the town of Paradise without warning. It is now the most destructive fire in California's history and may have started from an alleged electrical line malfunction. The 3 fires, fueled by another strong burst of Santa Ana winds, are expected to rage on throughout the weekend. And here we are, over halfway through this week, and it's still ongoing. Now, President Trump approved an emergency declaration on Friday and sending federal funds to California. Where those funds go remains to be seen. Evacuees are reported being turned away from overflowing shelters in Southern California as the 3 wildfires continue to ravage the state, forcing some 300,000 panicked residents to flee their homes. Now, communities across Ventura and Los Angeles counties, as I said, were placed under evacuation orders, and the fires have razed countless buildings and homes to the ground, and more than 600 members of law enforcement canvassed the area through Friday night, pounding on doors to tell 250,000 residents to leave their homes as the fires closed in. Now, this is covering more than nearly 75,000 acres of as of Saturday morning. And the Los Angeles Times reported that a number of shelters have had to close their doors as they have no more space, creating an even more dire situation as the firestorm threatens to intensify when another round of strong, dry Santa Ana winds blew through over the weekend. Like I said, I'll have more on that later. A teenage MS-13 gang member this week was sentenced to 40 years in prison for torturing and murdering a 15-year-old girl. This was done by a girl. It boggles my mind. It really does. I know I shouldn't differentiate between the genders. I just have great difficulty in females exhibiting that type of violence. It bothers me immensely. Venus Romero Ioreta, who was 18, pleaded guilty to the murder in Fairfax County, Virginia. I highlighted that for a reason. Those regular to the show will know why. 1 year after she brutally stabbed Damaris Reyes Rivas 13 times. And fellow MS-13 gangsters recorded the murder victim being tortured, having her tattoo cut off, and also stabbed to death by Venus Ayarata. And this was then sent to gang leaders in El Salvador. She pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, abduction and criminal street participation earlier this year at the court of Fairfax, County, Virginia, and the judge imposed a sentence of 40 years in prison last Friday. Now, so far, 7 of the 10 people charged in connection with the murder have been convicted or have pled guilty. MS-13, for those who don't know, is short for Mara Salvatrucha, and it consists chiefly of immigrants or descendants of immigrants from Central America. Now, the gang is notorious for its links to cartels, bush, and organised crime, and for its ability to access high-powered weapons. Because many of the MS-13 gangs are under the age of 18, the US is unable to lawfully return them to their home countries. That rule has to be changed. Now, the gang has a strong presence in Southern California, Washington, and also Virginia. All areas with substantial Salvadoran populations. They're not just Salvadoran, I might add. There are at least 30,000 members in a range of countries, including at least 10,000 in America alone. And its official motto is kill, rape, control. Nice people. Germany next. Elite soldiers planned to kill the Green Party candidate Claudia Roth and other left-wingers who they wanted to execute their plot when law and order, according to them, broke down in Germany. It didn't. And they believed it was imminent, and death squads were formed for the assassinations. 200 elite soldiers who formed a covert neo-Nazi faction within Germany's equivalent of the SAS planned to butcher immigrants across the country. They conspired to unleash chaos on what they codenamed Day X when they planned to kill the Green Party leader Claudia Roth, Foreign Minister Heiko Maas, and ex-President Joachim Gauck. But authorities smashed the breakaway group of Bundeswehr KSK unit before their death squads could carry out the assassinations. We'll have more on those type of people later. More good news. I don't know where she's going to put all her shoes in prison, but there you go. Former First Lady of the Philippines, former trustee family, cabal-oriented family, fake M1 family, etc., etc. The Marcoses, this time Imelda, was arrested on Friday and sentenced to a minimum 42 years in prison after being found guilty of 7 counts of graft during a two-decade rule of her husband, the late Ferdinand Marcos. An anti-corruption court in Manila sentenced Marcos, who is now 89, to serve 6 to 11 years in prison for each anti-corruption violation after she funneled some 200 million to, go figure, Swiss accounts. I wonder who lives there. Yes, those unlovable Rothschildians. During her term as Manila governor between 1978 and 1984, the charges took over a quarter of a century to prosecute, as many potential witnesses were executed prior. That's how they work. Now, the ruling disqualifies Marcos from holding public office, and but according to legal experts, it's unlikely that Marcos will spend time in jail due to her age and possible appeals. And we'll see how age makes a difference. Either way, I hope she's dealt with in a suitable manner. Back to America again, and the spending costs of each state. Each state spends billions every year just to keep prisoners locked up. Nearly 1.5 million Americans were incarcerated in state prisons, and this is according to the last report in 2016. It's probably gone up since. That same year, United States spent about $58 billion to keep these people locked up. A lot of money in it. It could go to so much better things. How much each state spends on prisons goes far beyond a simple per prisoner calculation. In fact, there's little to no correlation between the states that spend the most per capita and the states with more prisoners per capita. Instead, variations in state spending boil down to a range of budgetary factors and also policy decisions. Prisons may have many expenses related to their main function of confining lawbreakers, and in addition to securing the prisoners with infrastructure, technology and personnel, they have to provide inmates with the basic necessities such as food, healthcare and even entertainment. On a per capita basis, states' prison spending ranges from less than $100 per person to nearly $500 per person. A Wall Street reviewed the states with the highest and lowest prison spending per person according to the research conducted by the Vera Institute of Justice, which is an independent non-profit national research and policy organisation, and one of the primary drivers of the differences in state prison spending per capita is salaries for prison personnel. Now, the cost of hiring staff, according to the group's report, accounts for 68% of total prison spending, and as a result, states where correctional workers have higher average salaries tend to spend more per capita, and the opposite is true among the low spending states. Of the 20 states with the lowest per capita spending, just 4 have an average correctional officer annual wage higher than the national average wage of $43,550. I think there's a lot of people who question 43,000 being the national average. I think it's a lot lower. A couple of more pieces, and then we'll go into the intel. CNN on Tuesday filed a lawsuit against President Donald Trump and top administration officials demanding that correspondent Jim Acosta's access to the White House be restored. A dramatic turn in the president's years-long battle with the press that sets up a court fight over the First Amendment. Now, while the suit is specific to CNN and Acosta, this could have happened to anyone, according to CNN announcing a lawsuit, which asks for a restraining order requiring that Acosta's security credentials be returned. If left unchallenged, the actions of the White House would create a dangerous chilling effect for any journalist who covers our elected officials. Yeah, I'm laughing because he's called them journalists. Oh dear, really? Now, the White House revoked Acosta's credentials, known as a hard pass, several hours after a testy exchange with the president during a news conference last week. And Trump told Acosta CNN should be ashamed for employing him during the back and forth, which including a White House staffer attempting to take the microphone out of Acosta's hand. White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders claimed last week that Acosta's pass was revoked due to the reporter placing his hands on a young woman, but any contact appeared incidental, according to CNN, and is arguing in its suit that the pass was pulled as retaliation for aggressive coverage of the president. And it was later revealed that Fox News is also supporting this lawsuit, ending the Q-led illusion that Fox News was any different to any of the other Portal People stations. Angela Merkel, who won't be lasting much longer, has requested this week that the European Union should work towards creating its own joint army. Comment in the middle. She made the statement just after marking the centenary of the end of World War I with world leaders in France. Merkel told EU lawmakers on Tuesday that we have to work on the vision of one day creating a real European army. And in a speech at the European Parliament in Strasbourg, France, Merkel said that such a force would not mean the end of NATO, which is the US-led military alliance. And she called for the creation of a European Security Council. Really? So, what about the American people, Mrs. Merkel? Or should I use the correct term, Hitler? We, the American people, have been paying for your security for the last 70 years, and quite frankly, we're tired of it. And you can call it a US-led military alliance all you like. It's nothing to do with America or its people. NATO is a rogue army, which you, Germany, and you, Merkel, have propagated. Pure and simple. Otherwise, you would have thrown them out as a rogue entity, which is what should happen anyway. NATO is Rothschild's private army. And this country and its people have funded that way more than any other country. I think Germany's contribution was somewhere in the region of 1%, when it should have been 2% per nation. America's, if memory serves me correct, and I'm not getting mixed up with the UN fund, of which the American people pay the bulk of that also, is somewhere in the region of 25%. Or is it? No, that is the UN. It's 4 to 5%. So why are the American people protecting the European people with our money, and yet Germany contributes 1%? So go and create your own European army, but first throw out NATO and shut down their rogue operations. And please don't be asking the American people to pay for it anymore, because we're sick of it. Last piece, Israel's defense minister has announced he's resigned yesterday, I think this was, over the cabinet's decision to accept a ceasefire. Tells you everything about this particular guy, which ended 2 days of fighting with the Palestinian militants, as they're called, in Gaza. Avigdor Lieberman denounced the move as surrendering to terror. Oh dear, does he not read his own words? And he said his right-wing Yisrael Beitenu party would leave the ruling coalition, which could lead to an early election, which may be of interest. That may end Mr. Netanyahu as well. So go ahead. 8 people were killed on Monday and Tuesday as militants allegedly fired 460 rockets towards Israel and Israeli forces, who then in return got planes out and bombed 160 targets in Gaza. And the ceasefire was largely holding as of yesterday, and schools and businesses in southern Israel reopened after no rockets were reported overnight. However, Israel's military said it had shot at and captured a Palestinian man who tried to breach the Israeli-Gaza border fence while hurling grenades. You know, it makes you wonder, where did he get these rockets and grenades and military equipment? You know, Palestine's a very poor country. They can't hardly afford to feed themselves, never mind of expensive, 460 rockets. Methinks it's the same countries who are firing back are the ones supplying. But there you go. The Palestinian health officials later said that the man shot at the border was a fisherman, had been killed by Israeli fire in northern Gaza, and the Israeli military said soldiers had shot the man because he was advancing towards the border fence, as you do. You imagine the outrage if the migrants on the Mexican border and the caravan, if the American military opened fire on them just for approaching the border. Can you imagine the outrage on that? And yes, nothing gets said when it's a Palestinian. Something to ponder.